Thank you for tuning into the Postmodern Realities podcast from the Christian Research Institute and the Christian Research Journal. I'm Melanie Cogdill, managing editor of the Christian Research Journal. It's June 2019, and you're listening to episode 127, Addressing the Emotional Problem of Evil, Why Christians Hope. On this episode, I'm joined by Mary Jo Sharp, who is assistant professor of apologetics at Houston Baptist University, and she's also the author of the Bible study, Why Do You Believe That? And she has an upcoming book on hypocrisy called Why I Still Believe, which will be released by Zondervan later in the fall. Mary Jo has written an article called Addressing the Emotional Problem of Evil, Why Christians Hope, and it's available free online at our website, equip.org. Mary Jo, it's good to have you on.
Hey, I'm really glad that I could be here with you guys.
Well, this is a really important topic to cover. In fact, I was just listening to NPR the other day, and they were going over experiencing the death of a child and, what kind of answers can you give people? And so a pediatrician called in and he said, well, the best answer I could give someone is to read the book, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People by Rabbi Kushner. And I was really kind of sad to hear that, book, because I feel like it doesn't really give an answer to the problem of evil or why things are happening to people that they don't understand that seem evil to them or bad. So can you kind of unpack for us, what is the problem of evil?
Yeah, the problem of evil is actually a logical dilemma or a philosophical question concerning the presence of evil in a world that a perfectly good God has made. Many philosophers believe that the existence of evil constitutes a difficulty for believing in God. It's a discussion that goes back in time to the ancients, such as the ancient Greeks. So Socrates, Plato, these guys are dealing with this. And since it's been around so long, it appears in many different ways. It has so many different formats. Sometimes people will ask it in the form of a question. They'll say something like, if God is good, why is there evil in the world? Or how can God be good when there is so much pain and suffering in the world? Other times it appears as in the form of a logical argument, such as J.L. Mackey's famous set of propositions when he said, God is omnipotent, God is wholly good, evil exists. And Mackey believed that that was a logically inconsistent set of statements. So he's saying, basically to reframe it for people, he's saying if God is omnipotent and God is wholly good, then there would be no evil. Evil exists, therefore there is no God. So I've come across this objection in the form of even very personal considerations, not just the logical form, not just the questioning form, but very personal ones, such as, if God's good, why did he allow my son to die at 3 years old? And that happens a lot of times when I talk on this subject, is that I'll have people who come up afterwards and ask me the sort of personal, heartfelt questions where they're obviously experiencing the grief and the pain, the emotional side of the problem of evil. So it is an objection to the existence of God that has many ways to express it. And Christians throughout history have not been blind to the problem. It's not just a contemporary issue, as I mentioned earlier. It's been considered for thousands of years. And Christians have been attempting to reconcile God's goodness with the evil we see in the world for many years. This task is often called a theodicy or a defense. So that's sort of taking this big, broad statement, what is the problem of evil, and showing you there are many different ways that it can come at a person. And specifically, we're kind of leaning towards the emotional impact that it has on people.
Why do you think it's important for Christians to discuss this? Because I'm sure all of us have come across this. I know I have, where people will say, I can't believe in a God that exists where there has been the Holocaust, or there's been wars, or even, like you said, the personal things. Like I was listening to that NPR podcast where, why should an infant die if God is good, or a toddler, or why would they get cancer? And so why is this important for Christians to understand and to talk about?
Yeah, that's a really important question, because as you can see from our conversation so far, discussion on the problem of evil can get really philosophical, can get deeply philosophical in nature. So it can intimidate some Christians from engaging with it. But this objection remains as one of the greatest objections to belief in God's existence. And when I say greatest, I mean that it is one of the most frequent. It's one of the ones that has some of the most work done on it. So Christians need to be engaging in this, for one, because it is the question of our time. Like, it's the question of Western philosophy when it comes to, does God exist? So as William Lane Craig states, he says, the problem of evil is certainly the greatest obstacle to belief in the existence of God. When I ponder both the extent and the depth of suffering in the world, whether due to man's inhumanity to man or natural disasters, I must confess that I find it hard to believe that God exists. No doubt many of you have felt the same way. So as I mentioned before, it's one of the most frequent objections that I hear. But that's not just the only reason. It's not just because it's frequent that we need to be discussing this objection. It's also because everyone will experience some kind of evil in this life, whether it is pain and suffering, or perhaps a moral injustice, or even just regular old nastiness by fellow humans. You see, no one goes unscathed by the problem of evil. So while it might be easy to say, well, hey, the argument from evil seems to be purely academic, that's for those ivory tower theologian types. Rather, our experiences in life continue to thrust us into this conversation by means of our own pain and suffering, or of our own dealing with these instances of evil. So we really don't have the luxury of merely pontificating on this matter, because it's an objection that will affect everyone in some way. And for me, this is really important to me personally, because as I was going through a time of doubt, I never heard this topic addressed in the church, either in Bible study classes or from the pulpit. And I think there is quite a lack of teaching on this very important philosophical question, which really gets at the heart of the gospel. It really gets at the heart of the Christian message. So I think it's something that Christians need to pay attention to. Pastors and lay leaders really need to help their congregation by having discussions on this.
And I think, too, in our day and age, it's like we're more confronted by this issue as Christians than ever because of the internet. In other words, we know more news and about atrocities happening, I think, than we've ever had before. And so sometimes it's really hard to process. I know, if I read an article about sex trafficking by ISIS or something like that, and they just, graphically describe something, it's so overwhelming.
Yeah.
Like, how can we even answer this? What should we do about these women who are being abused, or whatever it is? Or, there's these floodings and everybody lost everything in a flood or a hurricane. It's so overwhelming because we're confronted with it almost daily when we just open our homepage and see the news.
Yeah.
Now, in your article, you mentioned this Dallas Willard quote that I noted. So I want to tell everyone about that. You specifically quote him saying, "Feelings live on the front row of our lives, like unruly children clamoring for attention." So, in light of that quote, like, how do our emotions, affect our response to the problem of evil? It seems like they're tied to this issue as we think about it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think part of that, like you already elucidated part of that, like going back to the fact that, it could be something we experience personally that causes us to have this question, but it also could be all that exposure that we have to so much evil in the world that's constantly, like paraded before our eyes through social media. So we can have this like emotive response to it, and definitely would have an emotional response if we are suffering. So the problem is that feelings can actually ravage our ability to reason through a situation, especially when that situation devastatingly affects our lives. So though you have maybe presented with a logically coherent argument for why God allows evil, the person who's receiving that, or if it's you, if you're suffering, you may not really be impressed by such an argument. You might reject God based solely on the existence or the experience of suffering. Dallas Willard actually talks about a connected idea, not specifically addressing suffering or pain or grief, but he says, when sometimes it's difficult to reason with people, and he gives the reasoning for that is that their very mind has been taken over by one or more feelings, and their mind is made to defend and serve those feelings at all cost. So that's kind of what he's getting at when he says like feelings live on the front row of our lives. Like if you think of those school children, you think of your children at church, how you're always telling them, be quiet and all, don't make them a scene. And yet that's kind of what they do. They kind of draw attention to themselves, and you're always trying to keep them, hey, don't make a scene. And that's sort of what happens to us too. Especially when something is so devastating as experiencing a great loss or experiencing pain in our lives, that tends to take precedence, and it can keep us from being able to reason well. I also want to mention, because I don't want to miss this point, since we're dealing with the emotional side, the emotional effects of the problem of evil in our experience, that as humans, we have to remember our desires also play into our ability to seek and know truth. And I have wondered sometimes in my own life, I have wondered about my own desire to find what is true. And that's because of the suffering of my family, specifically at the hands of church members or leaders or pastors. So for me, it got to a point where I had to confront myself and say, I know I'm grieving. I know I'm hurt. I know I experienced trauma, but do I still want truth? Do I still want to know what's true? And that was not an easy thing for me to get to. That's not just a natural thing that you think about, while you're grieving, right? So I had to wonder, not just deal with the emotional side of things and the grief that I was experiencing, but I also had to think, how has that affected my desire to even want to know what's true? And I think that's a place that's tough to get to, because our emotions and desires can confuse us. And so it's really important that we help people who are suffering clarify and refine what they're dealing with as far as the subjection to the problem of evil, if we care about helping them discover truth.
So, in light of that, what kind of approach can Christians take when someone is, suffering emotionally from an instance of evil or something that has, something bad that's happened to them? I think that's different, like you were saying, how do you deal with that, and how would you approach that differently than, philosophically addressing logically the argument of how to address the problem of evil? So what are different, how can we be discerning, and what are the different tactics that we should employ in those two different situations?
Yeah, that's really important. The first thing that I think that we should do is that we should ask the person who we're talking to, who we're engaging with on the problem of evil, we should ask them what they need in that moment. What are you looking for? Do you need a hug? Do you need answers? Do you need someone just to listen? What is it that would minister to them? I asked this of a lady who spoke with me at the end of one of my talks. She was a lady who had lost her child at a very young age. And I asked her, so what is it that I can do for you? And how can I help you? And I actually said those words, do you need a hug or do you need some answers? Because I'm good for both. And she said, I think I need a little of both. So in that instance, I found a person who was actually seeking, they actually opened the door to say, hey, let's have this conversation. But we have to remember always that in dealing with this issue, we need to minister to the grieving or suffering person first. Because while answering arguments and objections is a way of ministering, and I don't mean to say that it's not, because I truly think it is. I think sharing the truth in love is definitely a way of ministering to people. The problem is that it can come across as trite or unsympathetic or callous if we just charge forward in arguing, through the logical side of this or the philosophical side without considering where the person is at in their own process, especially in the process of grieving, but even in their own process with the argument. They may still be grieving over that instance of evil. And I've had that happen sometimes where a person didn't really want to talk through, how do I know God's good? They really wanted somebody who was okay with themselves, who's okay. They know where they're at. They know the truth that they believe, so that person so you can just listen to their story. So you can just listen to where they are at and the questions they have, without feeling like you have to jump in, you have to correct them. So I think one of the first things we should do is really just be compassionate listener and really take care of that person, desiring to minister to them. And then if they are ready, if they are willing, then we can definitely proceed with care if we're invited in to do so with them. So when I give a talk on addressing the problem of evil, one of the things that I usually discuss is how to proceed. And I say that we need to refine the objection with the person. Because if they are emotionally wrought, if they are emotionally distressed, then their objection can come out messy, right? Because human life is messy and grief is messy and suffering's messy. So I help them work through what it is that they're objecting to. And I try to place the objection into a more clarified format with them. What do you mean to say? Are you saying that God can't be good if there is evil in the world? Do you mean to say that because of the evil that you're experiencing, it's causing you to have doubt about God? There's just many things that I ask them to clarify. And when I say clarify, I mean, I'm trying to get somewhere where they feel safe in discussing the matter. They feel like they have confidence in talking about it. That's another reason I don't want to just launch into discussing the problem of evil, because of that fact that it is a logical argument and it can get so weighty. You can actually scare the person off, or you can make them become defensive. And like we explored before, if they get defensive, then they're going to serve that defensiveness. They're not going to open up and discuss the issue. They're actually going to serve their defensiveness and protect their feelings. And that's one of the things that's so difficult with addressing this problem, is that once that happens, it's really hard to break them out of that, because they are protecting themselves. They don't perceive it's a safe environment. So I make sure to refine the objection in a way that we can both have conversation. And then I help them define the term. What is it that we're talking about? That's really important in discussing the problem of evil. What do we mean when we say good and evil? And I help them work through that. And then as we work through that defining of the term, we find some material that we can talk about. We find some truths that we can share with each other. And then I outline my view, and I help them to see, what is the Christian response and how does that address the issue? So many times a person who is struggling with evil may seem sort of lost. They may seem like lost in a sea of uncertainty, and they're kind of pushed around by these waves of emotion crashing down upon him or her. So offering a safe environment to discuss the issue of God's goodness and evil can really be like throwing a lifesaver to them in that sea of uncertainty. Some people need to see some truth in order to have hope.
You're listening to the Postmodern Realities podcast from the Christian Research Institute and the Christian Research Journal. Today's guest is Mary Jo Sharp, and she has written a feature article for the Christian Research Journal. You can read it for free online at her website, equip.org. And her article is called Addressing the Emotional Problem of Evil, Why Christians Hope. And I'd also like to invite you to subscribe to the journal, or if you already do subscribe to the journal, consider a gift subscription for a family, a friend, or your pastor. A subscription is $33.50, and you can subscribe at our website, equip.org. And it's really important that we have this team of print subscribers, because they help us provide all these free online resources, which includes this weekly podcast, Postmodern Realities, as well as online exclusive journal articles, which are feature articles, film reviews, book reviews, or television reviews. And those are free to people worldwide who come to our website looking for answers and to be equipped to understand the Christian faith and the Christian worldview. And so we'd also like to ask you to seriously consider becoming a partner with us this month. It's our fiscal year end, and it's really essential that we have more partners that join with us in our ministry, and that would be continuing the ministry of this important resource, the Christian Research Journal, and this podcast. And so we highlight two resources that we talk about in this podcast today. The first is The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis, and the other is by a journal author, Clay Jones, and his book is called Why Does God Allow Evil? Compelling Answers for Life's Toughest Questions. And for either of those books, you can have one of them as a thank you for your gift in any amount. Or if you would like both of them to add to your Apologetics library, you can do so for a gift of $50 or more. So again, it's really essential that we end our fiscal year in June in a position of strength, and your partnership through your donation is vital. And perhaps you're someone who it's not in the budget for you this month, but maybe you are somebody that it is in the budget for you this month. And so we'd like you to help us by partnering with us and helping to equip other people worldwide. It means so much to us for you to consider it. You were just talking about, how we approach someone who's hurting or grieving, and, that we would have compassion towards them and we would help them process their situation and maybe clarify the issues that they're thinking through so that they don't think we're just like ramrodding into some intellectual discussion without caring about what they've been going through. But if we have, proceeded with compassion and we've taken that care to proceed and move forward through the topic with someone, how does truth factor into our response when we've come to that place? Like, okay, we have, considered what they're going through. We have clarified. So if someone is grieving or hurting, how do we then bring up some of the truth factors that we need to talk to them about in the midst of their situation?
Yeah, that's in responding to this question, I actually give an example of how it can affect them, and then we'll discuss some of how to proceed. But in the article that I wrote, I used an example of my friend Neil and his wife Anna when they gave birth to their daughter prematurely, and then 8 days later their daughter died. And Anna said that it felt like the darkest abyss she'd ever known, and she wondered how she could go on with just the task of living. Like, how could she raise their other daughter? And she asked over and over, what will I do? How could this happen? But see, Neil is an apologist, and he and Anna have shared many conversations in their marriage on the hardest questions of life, such as, is God good? Is he uninvolved? Is he indifferent? If God's good, why does he allow suffering in the world? So many questions they went through, like, why do bad things happen to good people? What about miracles? Who gets them? Why? Are they only for really good people? And how's my faith play into that? But over the years, what they had done is that they had come to several conclusions based on their discussions and study of the tough questions. So when the worst nightmare hit their family and panic and despair began to take hold of them, Neil says that he reminded Anna every day of the truths they had discovered over their marriage. Like, he talked to her and said, remember, we're not special in this. This happens to people everywhere, all over the world. This is a result of the evil that is in the world. These are the kinds of things that happen. And what happened for her was that she knew each phrase, though it was really existentially difficult, it was very emotionally hard to bear, was the result of years of searching for answers. And it really provided her stabilization during her great trauma, so that her belief and her faith were not based in just traditions or emotions, but she had a faith that stood on reasonable evidence. That's how she described it. I had a faith that stood on reasonable evidence. And it pulled her along, so that instead of grieving, such as others who have no hope, like Paul states in 1 Thessalonians 4:13-14, what Neil demonstrated was that since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. So truth can help us see the light when emotions tell us that there is no light. So to proceed through that, like, what do we do? How do we engage that? Well, like I was saying, I follow the pattern of that. First of all, just really asking them, what do you need? But then I really want to dig into refining that problem or the objection so that I can get to defining the term. And one of the reasons I really want to work on defining the term is, what are we talking about when we say what is evil? When we object to God on the basis of the presence of some kind of evil in the world. So I want to help them work through that, because I find that in our society, we tend to use words because they're in our language, they're in our vernacular, without really providing a grounding for what it is, for the concepts behind those words. So we'll just say, like, look at all this evil in the world. And it's horrible. And obviously, a good God wouldn't allow this. So we've got a lot of charged words there that we need to provide grounding for. So I try to help them to uncover, well, what do you mean by evil? And that's one of the things that if they're willing to proceed, right? Because this could be a really touchy subject at this point, but what do you mean by evil? And, where do you get a concept like that from? So I try to help them see that evil is parasitically related to good, in that it's inextricably tied to good, because evil is a privation of good. It's a lack of good. Evil's not a thing in itself. So when you're using evil, you're using it against some kind of good. You're using it as set against some kind of standard of good. This is what should be there. This is the standard. This should be the thing I see, and I'm not seeing that. And so therefore, I'm saying that it's evil. All this pain and suffering in the world, this is evil because it's not that good thing that I know should be there. And what that does, without going fully into the argument, what that does is it actually helps us see that ultimately we need to find that standard of goodness that we're using to say that what happened to me, or this life as I'm experiencing it, or the things we see on social media are indeed and in fact evil, and that has meaning. That's not just delusional or an illusion, but it actually has some kind of real meaning to it. So I want to help them see that, because that actually pulls them towards that need for a standard of goodness. Well, what are you using as your standard of good? What is the thing that you're comparing all this to? And I want to try to point them towards, well, the standard of goodness is God. That's the standard that we're using. So in order to make the objection from evil, we end up having a need for God as our standard of goodness to make this objection. So it's a very powerful argument when done thoughtfully, when done with a ministering heart, and it can pull them on towards the gospel and towards what God's solution to the problem of evil actually is.
So, those are tough things to talk about, especially when you're talking about your friend Neil and Anna, because, when you're in the midst of that, it's, hard to think through some of these really deep situations, but it's very important to these deep theological views. Yet there are other alternative viewpoints from the Christian worldview, and a lot of people will engage some of those. So what are some other alternative points of view from Christianity that addresses the problem of evil?
Yeah, that's great. I think this is an important part of our discussion as we are talking about the pain and suffering that we experience from the problem of evil. We need to consider the alternative views. And one of the main alternatives is a materialist worldview, in which the only thing that exists is matter. So that would mean that there's no immaterial realm, there's no spiritual realm, there's no God. So this is an atheist worldview. Because this view believes that everything in the universe is reducible to matter, there's no room here for immaterial concepts like good and evil. Right? That's a very important point to stress. Like in a worldview where there's no room for anything except material, matter, there are no things that are immaterial, such as concepts like good and evil. So therefore, though you might talk about pain and suffering as you could say it's something an individual doesn't prefer, that's something that they don't enjoy, we couldn't responsibly say, like intellectually say, that anything was evil or wrong, because in a universe void of moral qualities, things just happen. And this is a harsh reality. And as harsh as that sounds, given the current conversation that we're having, it is something that needs to be considered if we are objecting to the existence of God based in an aversion and in an emotional response to the evil that we see in the world. You see, there's really nothing in this like alternative view in this materialistic universe. There would really be nothing to which we could object, because there wouldn't be any good or evil. That I believe it's Richard Dawkins that says that the universe is void of these qualities. So there's nothing to which you can make the objection. Now, remember that in addressing the emotional problem of evil, I sort of hinted at this on the last question, we're addressing an objection to the existence or the experience of an actual evil. So the evil has to be something real in order for us to appropriately view a person's suffering as not good. And again, that sounds kind of harsh given the situation of the various like diseases and rape and murder and the things that we're handling in this conversation. But it is an important point not to miss. It's a grounding point. For an objection to evil to make sense, then it must be a response to real evil. Our aversion must be to something that actually is real, not just a dislike of the way things are or something that's an illusion. And, it's not just a materialistic worldview that has this or an atheistic worldview. When you move out to Buddhism or Hinduism, you're looking at good and evil that as we experience them in this world is just an illusion. So they aren't real. And again, that does not confirm or coincide with our experience of evil in this world. So it doesn't line up with the human experience.
So how could, in that atheistic worldview, I don't know how we could give anybody hope. A couple of months ago, Neil deGrasse Tyson, the physicist, had a tweet out there, and his tweet for the day was, "The universe is blind to our sorrows and indifferent to our pains. Have a nice day." So if the universe was blind to our sorrows and indifferent to our pain, how could we even offer anybody hope? So how helpful is it to utilize alternative points of view when someone's questioning their belief in God because of their pain and suffering? I mean, that kind of summed it up right there, his worldview. The universe doesn't care.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of being missed, Melanie. I think that's like the point that's being missed. And when we're talking about this problem of evil and our aversion to suffering and pain in the world, I mean, guys that hold to an atheistic worldview that, like you were saying with deGrasse Tyson, is just, yeah, that's not a thing. Like, there's no good or evil moral qualities to the universe. The universe just keeps rolling on until we all die that spectacular heat death, right? The universe just ends. So, and he's picking this up from his predecessors, from Carl Sagan and the guys before, even Bertrand Russell. There's nothing really there. So I think in one sense, these worldviews are unhelpful, and they leave a great void in being able to speak into our human experience, where we actually experience injustice, where we actually feel wronged, where we actually feel that this is not the way things should be. And if you look at our language, it's morally charged with the should and the ought. And, she died too young. What does that even mean? It means there's some kind of standard of goodness of a length of life that we're saying this length of life is good, this length of life is not, is, evil, just to put it in the framework of what we're discussing. So I think some of these worldviews need to own up to the fact that they are unhelpful. They don't speak into the human experience. But conversely, I think it's helpful to point that out. So I think it's helpful to say that by demonstrating to the person that in a worldview void of God, we're losing the grounding for these concepts such as good and evil. So we can hopefully show them, like, the purpose of saying, hey, in an alternative worldview, your experience is sort of, it's somewhat delusional. It doesn't actually match the reality of the universe that's void of these qualities. So in showing them that, maybe we can help them say, but in a Christian worldview, we can move them towards showing that God and evil are not logically incompatible. And we can show them that rather the evil we see in the world actually makes sense if the Christian story of creation, fall, and redemption are true. That this isn't the way things are supposed to be, and that this isn't the way things always will be.
So what is the great hope that we can communicate that's found in the Christian worldview as a response to someone's suffering and pain?
Yeah, and that's right. That's where we're driving towards, right? That's what this conversation is about. And that's the great story of humanity, is that there is great hope in the world, and it's not a delusional hope. It's not an illusion, but it's a real hope. And the great hope that is found in the Christian response is the unique suffering sacrifice of Jesus Christ, that, if true, does indeed provide great hope for mankind. So unlike the materialist worldview, the Christian worldview actually acknowledges evil as real. It's a real problem, and it is a departure from the way life is supposed to be. So what we see in the Christian story, and this is one of the reasons I'm always interested in talking about the problem of evil, is because it leads us towards the great Christian narrative, the story of God, what he's doing in the world, what he's done, and where things are going. It's the gospel. So God in Christianity, he takes on human flesh, and he lives a life that is unshielded from pain and suffering, and he lives that with us. So he goes through it with us, and he offers himself as a payment for and a solution to human evil. So as Romans 6:23 tells us, that the wages of sin is death. In other words, there's a consequence to evil, and that consequence is pain and suffering, and ultimately destruction of life, death. And if you think about it, you've got billions of humans that have been engaging in evil for however many long years, right? Which amounts to a lot of destructive consequence for the world in which we live. But you see, God takes on this consequence himself because we can't do it, right? We're the ones causing the problem. By the way, that was a major revelation for me when I came to faith in God, because I was raised without church. I was raised without Christianity and without religion. When I realized, like, oh, humans can't solve the injustice in the world, the problems of the world, because they're the ones causing it. Like, that really impacted me. And so I was like, wow, that makes sense. See, God takes on the consequence of evil, which is that death. So he dies, taking on the consequence of our evil. And then he defeats that consequence, or you can say overrules it, by rising from the dead. And so he offers a reversal of the consequence of evil. He offers a reversal of the consequence of sin, and he offers us redemption, restoration, restoring us to a right relationship with himself. And so this action on behalf of God is an actual solution to the very real problem of evil. So God's solution provides resources, therefore, to inform our emotional response to evil. And I'll give one scripture to go with that. 1 Peter 1:6-7 states, "In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may be proved genuine and may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed." And actually, I want to couple that with Paul in Romans 8. He says, "I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us."
So, how can Christians be equipped to even answer this objection? Is there anything that we could be doing to prepare ourselves when we encounter someone who's coming to us? It might be a family member, a friend, or someone in our church that's going through, or maybe somebody that's an unbeliever in our office or in our neighborhood that's going through suffering and pain and has this objection. So is there anything that we could be doing to be able to answer this question in a compassionate but also a truthful manner?
Yeah, definitely. And we mentioned this earlier. And one of the things is by Christians learning the great truths and doctrines of the Christian faith, that especially the ones, well, first of all, let's just say that by learning the great truths and doctrines of the Christian faith, because I'm coming across more and more people who are stepping away from Christianity because they don't know the truths, they don't know the doctrines, they don't know the resources available to them for the human experience that are just within the scriptures themselves and in the tradition of what Christians believe. So, but then even more specifically, those ones that respond directly to the problem of evil, such as the passages I mentioned from Peter and Paul's writing. And so getting to know what it is you believe and why you believe it, doing what Neil and Anna did, will really help you. It gives you some resources for when you are going through these issues. But I recommend some more. There's, a lot of material online on this matter. And there's guys like Dr. William Lane Craig has written on this, Ravi Zacharias, and of course C.S. Lewis, all have written on this extensively or lectured on it. A good place I would suggest people start, sort of an entry point, would be Dr. Clay Jones' book, Why Does God Allow Evil? Great entry point, very accessible. But let me just say this, and how do we prepare? Okay, so you can gain knowledge, right? You can read about this stuff, but one of the things you have to do is then let these truths soak in, right? Let them guide our response to pain and devastation and suffering in this life, and first guide our own response to our own pain and suffering. And from doing that, right, then from that overflow of our experience and the way that we've handled things, we'll be able to minister to others. But we need to allow these truths to greatly soak over our own lives, because if Christ is truly risen from the dead, as Paul said he did in 1 Corinthians 15:20, then his resurrection is the model. It's a model of the resurrection to come. And that is that his body's healed, he's present with God. And this gives hope to believers that, again, this is not the way things have been, nor the way they always have to be. And we can experience that redeeming power of Christ now in this life. We're not even just hanging on hope for the next. Jesus said that he brought the kingdom of God to us. So the great hope is that in the midst of all this pain and suffering, we can bring that redemptive power of Christ, that light of God, into our own lives and then out from us into the world. So we can demonstrate this hope by allowing the truth of God's actions and promises to guide our own response to the problem of evil, helping others see that there can be real hope, and then through that, real healing.
Well, finally, I want to end with some fun rapid fire questions for Mary Jo on a lighter note. So summer has a lot of delicious fruits that are out only in the summer. So watermelon or peaches?
Oh, peaches.
During the summer, do you like a vacation away? Or are you a homebody and prefer a staycation?
Oh, no, I'm a vacation away, definitely.
Are you an early bird or night owl?
Night owl.
Introvert or extrovert?
Oh my gosh, I am so introverted and nobody believes me about that.
And would you rather do your own taxes or go to jury duty? Not get out of jury duty, but go to jury duty.
Oh, do my own taxes or go to jury duty? I don't know, Melanie. Maybe jury duty.
Well, thanks, Mary Jo, for being a guest on the Postmodern Realities podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Today's guest has been Mary Jo Sharp, and she's written a feature article for the Christian Research Journal, and it's called Addressing the Emotional Problem of Evil, Why Christians Hope. And you can read it free online at our website, equip.org, where you can also subscribe to our journal for $33.50. In addition, I just want to mention again our two offers for this podcast. If you partner with us with a donation, you can either receive The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis or the other book by Clay Jones, one of our journal authors. It's called Why Does God Allow Evil? Compelling Answers for Life's Toughest Questions. And either of those books are your thank you from us for your gift of any amount, or if you would like both of them, for your gift of $50 or more. And so we are very grateful for your partnership. It's completely vital to keep bringing you this podcast for free, as well as all of our online exclusive articles and our website that has literally hundreds and hundreds of journal articles from the past, as well as these new online exclusives. So thanks for your consideration to help us continue this vital ministry. We'd like to hear from you, so connect with us on social media, like the Bible Answer Man Facebook page, and follow CRI, Christian Research Journal, Hank Hanegraaff, and the Bible Answer Man on Twitter. And please subscribe to the Bible Answer Man channel on YouTube. If you like this episode, please subscribe to the Postmodern Realities podcast on iTunes, and please rate and review our podcast. When you rate and review our podcast, it helps others see our content. And please share this episode on your social media accounts. Be sure you tune in daily to the Bible Answer Man broadcast, hosted by CRI President Hank Hanegraaff, who answers your questions live on air. To ask Hank a question, call 888-ASK-HANK, Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. In addition, head to iTunes and subscribe to Hank Unplugged, Hank's audio podcast. Follow Hank Off the Grid, where he has in-depth conversations with some of the brightest minds discussing topics you care about. So until our next Christian Research Journal author conversation, thanks for listening to the Postmodern Realities podcast.